Okay, so I want to walk you through a typical turn sequence. Now, key thing to remember with this turn sequence is that we add a movement phase. It's a bit different than the basic card game because there was no movement in the basic game. So we add that movement phase between the beginning of the turn and the commitment phase. So right before commitment, you're going to move units. Just keep that in mind. Now, every function in each phase is accomplished first by the winner of initiative that turn, which we track with this little initiative counter. We use this every turn. So U.S. initiative, German initiative. So the first step of every turn is to roll initiative for this turn using 1d10. The highest number wins, and you re-roll any ties. So here's the U.S. roll. The U.S. gets a 9, and the Germans get a 4. So we've determined that the U.S. retains the initiative for this turn. Now, that's not always a good thing. Sometimes it's better to move last. It's always, of course, better to fire first, so there's good and bad with winning initiative. It may determine certain moves that you make that turn as that player. For example, if you win initiative, you're in a better position to close assault or to raid a feature tile. Don't worry about all of these rules that we're going to talk about a bit real briefly here. Every one of them is described in detail further in the rules and in further video tutorials. So we're going to kind of skim through that just to give you a feel for how a typical turn goes. So we've determined that initiative is won by the U.S. The next step is the movement phase. On turn 1 you're going to skip this, but let's say that we're in turn 3 or something. So we're going to move ground units already in play if desired and able to move. You don't have to move anything if you don't want. Now, the movement rates are described on the quick reference card since there's not that info on these cards from the basic game. But it's very simple. Infantry move 2, and you can discard or burn a command card. For example, just burn the card for not using its function in order to go an additional space. Vehicles move 1, and they can move an additional space if you push them by also discarding a command card. That's per unit. So that's a way you can kind of sprint across the map if you need to. So movement, initiative winner first. We're going to go ahead and move the U.S. units if desired, and so this Sherman tank is going to move up, and the sniper is going to move into the church. Very easy. Bazooka team, I think he's going to move up as well, out of the crops and into this house ruin. Gets a bit of defense from that house ruin. Now, we go ahead and switch to the German player. The Germans now get their chance to move. And I think they're going to do something similar. The tank is going to move right up into the middle of the street. We're going to have a little face-off here. And these two rifle squads, they're going to move into this shed for a little bit of cover. Okay, so movement is complete. Now, we also resolve any opportunity fire, which we'll describe later, but there's none in this particular turn. You would resolve that now as well. So now we move to the commitment phase. We've already determined the initiative winner, so initiative winner first, again, is now going to commit new units into play. Let's say that this is my U.S. hand, and so I want to bring in these 2 infantry units. There's a stacking limit of any 2 friendly units. Let's say that my setup zone is any of these spaces in column 1. I'm going to bring these in over here, kind of behind the cover of these buildings a bit. So those 2 units come into play. And now the Germans. The Germans are going to also commit a unit. They're going to commit this flak gun with artillery crew. Now, one thing to keep in mind is each player has a rear line area as well as a front line area. So you can see that this unit, right under its title, is a rear line unit. The flak gun is a long range rear line artillery unit. It's going to go to the rear line of the Germans, which is back here, anywhere along here. And there's no grid to it because there's no movement of artillery in the back. So, real quickly and easily, you've got commitment done as well. Now, if there's any other commitment functions that you want to do, for example, play dig in or hold down on a card, on a unit, you can do that as well right here. And we're not going to do any of those. So, now we go on to commitment of new air units into play. This is also part of commitment. So we've committed all the ground units. Now we commit air units and declare all aircraft flight paths. In this case, we don't have any air units coming in or any air units already in play that are coming back around for another pass. And again, we're going to go over flight paths in more detail in a later video, and it's very cool how that works. So we're going to skip it for this turn because we don't have any aircraft. And so we're going to go on to performing any other commitment phase functions. That's, again, the hull downs, the command cards that are played in the commitment phase, like commit reserves, and etc. So let's go on to the combat phase. The first thing in combat is to declare aircraft and artillery targets, initiative winner first. So we have no aircraft or artillery for the U.S., so we skip that for the U.S. We do declare that for the Germans. They do have an artillery unit. So, and a brief rule to throw at you is artillery firing on the front has to be spotted. So it's very easy to do that. An infantry unit has to spot instead of attack if you want to use that rear line piece. So then you would mark that with a spotting counter instead of a paired targeting counter. So let's say that we're just not going to use that flat gun and spot for these infantry because they want to maybe attack this bazooka team directly instead. You'll see that they'll have line of sight into that shed and be able to potentially affect them. So the aircraft and artillery targets are declared first by the initiative winner and then by the opposing player. And then you declare all other targets. Again, initiative winner first and then the opposing player. So all other targets. All right, so what do we have here? We've got a sniper. He may or may not be able to see these units, and that's how we determine that is a line of sight check. So real easily you're going to take a straight line tool, whether it's a tape measure or a string, and you're going to draw a line between the center dot to center dot. If you're within range, which is 5 for these infantry units, snipers actually have a longer range than that, but we'll get over that later. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're in range, and so the sniper may want to fire out from the church into this open shed at one of the rifle squads. The way we mark that is with a paired targeting counter for the U.S. So that's going to be my first target as the U.S. player. I'm going to mark that number 1 is firing at the number 1 target. Very easy. And when his attack is complete, we flip that over. Okay, so the sniper's declared. Now let's see if the bazooka team can do anything. Okay, the bazooka team has line of sight, and I'll go over how that works later, but I can easily see he has line of sight over this unhighlighted edge to this tank. So the bazooka is going to fire at the tank. And again, we mark that with a paired counter. The order of these counters are not important. The numbers in particular are not, any specific order to how they have to fire. It's just paired counters so you can track who's firing where. And then the tank is going to fire at the tank. And these 30 cal and rifle squads are not going to fire anywhere because they're out of range and they can't see anything. So that's it for my U.S. declaration. Now the Germans do the same. They're going to declare where they're going to fire. So in this case, these 2 rifle squads are going to have line of sight into this ruined shed or ruined building, and both of these rifle squads are going to fire on this bazooka team directly. So they're sighting on that target. Now, the Panzer IV, he's got a couple of options here. He could fire at that building and try to take the building itself out, or simply fire at this Sherman down the street, and that's what he's going to do. So the Panzer IV will bring its main gun to bear on this Sherman, and now all targets are declared. So once all of those targets are declared, within the combat phase, again, you're going to alternate resolving attacks, initiative winner first. So again, the U.S. won initiative this turn, they fire first. And all that means is you get the first choice of who's going to fire as the U.S. player. So what we do is then resolve all other attacks in an alternating fashion. So the U.S. is going to open up with this Sherman. They're going to use the 75 main gun. It needs a 10 or better, as you can see here, against a tank. That's what he's firing against, to hit. So roll 2d10 and sum them together, and you can see that that is a hit. That's a 14. So the main 75 actually hits the Panzer IV. We're going to roll for damage now. This is intensity added to the damage index. 6 and 7 is 13. That gets through on an armor of 6, absorbs 6 of those points. So 7 points do get through on 11. He's down to 4. We're going to temporarily mark that he's down to 4 because there's other targets coming at him. And so we just put that in line with the card. And we also draw a damage card. Let's see what happens. Okay, in this case the tank effect is that it's immobilized. So opposing units receive bonus 2 to hit it now. And this unit receives a penalty of 2 to its defense. So it's stuck there. So I'm going to slide that card right underneath Panzer IV to note that he's immobilized from that effect. Now, the U.S. Sherman's attack is complete. We mark that by flipping that over, or just removing a counter. Okay, now we alternate to the German player. He gets to choose what he's going to do. And I think what the German's going to do is go ahead and fire back with this 75 of the Panzer IV. So 11 is firing at 11, which is the tank. And he's going to roll 2d10. He needs an 11 or better to hit. And he rolled a 12, so that is a hit. And we're going to roll damage. Plus 7 is 10. 10 minus 5, which is the defense of that unit, is going to be 5 off of 14. Now, it's not enough to damage him. He's down to 9. But we're going to temporarily mark that he's down to 9. Now, if there's no other attacks, you don't really have to mark that he's temporarily at 9, but you can anyway. And now we flip this over that attack is complete. And we're back to the U.S. player to resolve an attack. So the U.S. player is going to figure out where he's going to fire next, who he's going to fire with next. And I think he's going to use this sniper. So let's fire the sniper. He's got a Springfield M1903A4. He's going to fire this with 2d10. He needs an 8 or better to hit. And that is a 7. Barely a miss into the shed. We flip this over. And the rifle squad fights another day. Now the rifle squads get their turn. They're the only 2 units of the Germans left. The first one is going to fire. He's going to use any 2 weapons that can affect the target. So in this case it's infantry. I can affect infantry with all 3 of these weapons. I have to choose 2. So I'm going to use the rifles and the MG34. This whole squad is going to open up on the bazooka team in that ruin. Okay, so firing first with the rifles, I need an 11 or better on 2d10. That's a hit. 2 is added to 1. 3 points. Now what's interesting here is you look at where he's located. He's in this house ruin, and that gives him a defense of 3. Normally has no defense. So infantry are a bit less fragile in this game because they can survive in cover. So 3 points is all taken by the house rubble itself. Bazooka team's totally fine. Now we go to his next attack, MG34. High rate of fire, 3 rolls, 12 or better. Missed with a 6. Hit with a 12. So we roll damage now. 1 is added to 6, that's 7 points. That's going to damage him. 7 minus 3 is 4. And that is just enough to actually take him out. And so the bazooka team is gone. And the other attack that was declared from the rifle squad is also complete. So this goes out. The German player would score 3 points. And the bazooka team's attack will no longer occur. So damage in this game is instantaneous, not simultaneous. So if you take out a unit before it can fire, it's good for you and bad for your opponent. So now that all attacks are complete, we can actually go to the next step, which is the draw phase. Next step, being the draw phase, you're going to each get a command card off the top. So the Germans get a card, and the U.S. gets a card. And then we're also going to have a choice of any combination of 2 additional cards, command or unit. So I can draw 2 more of these, 2 more of these, or a combination of 1 of each. So the U.S. player is going to draw 2 unit cards. There's 1, there's 2. So he drew a Sherman and a mortar squad. And the German's also going to draw 2 cards from the unit stack. And he drew a Tiger with a tank crew. Very good draw. And so now that the draw phase is complete, we go to the end of the turn. End of the turn is where we count down any damage effects that are temporary and any other counters. And we place any aircraft with their pilot under the reserves deck if turns of flight equals 0. So in other words, if the aircraft is out of fuel, they go back to the reserves deck underneath and may come back in later. So in this case, this temporary damage, he was down to 9, remember, is now gone. That gets removed. He's back up to 14. These counters go away, and any units that are surviving stay out in play. And again, we've got a damaged tank. Now that damage, remember he was down further than that, but he's now back up to 6 at the end of the turn. So at the end of the turn, you're only either at the damage breakpoint, if you have a damage card at present, or you're at the full endurance. In the case of the Sherman, where he kind of shrugged off that hit, and he's back up to 14. So it can be very tough to take out larger tanks like a Tiger without help from multiple units. So with that, we've gone through a complete turn in detail, and again, we've gone through combat as well, so you've got a glimpse of how combat works. If you remember, if you've played the basic game of Spearpoint 1943, you'll see that that's very similar. There's just a few additional checks, again, like line of sight and range and so forth, which is all covered later in these rules.